It's been just over 1 human year since hostilities even began between the Nishani and the Forced. Since then, everywhere else has been rather quiet, but it's been very tense. Few skirmishes, but nothing else super crazy that can be expected as a major battle. Just the one time they tried to rip each other's throats out through their bungholes, and then it's just quiet. Neither side has enough forces to skirt around. None of them are able to flank each other, being that it's such a narrow corridor. And it's been a little under a year since a certain group that we know all so well left their jobs and retreated back into the human territory, finally setting on Sigma 957. And on 957, it's been rather quiet. The kids are growing very, very fast, so much so that many of the new mothers, i.e., Femkist and Gregnar, are a little put back at the idea of the kids being so independent and running around the farm so much. Though they are having a blast, having plenty of room to work around, they're definitely being taught exactly how dangerous farm equipment can be, and shown how absolutely horrifying it can be if they get caught up in it. Though they are extremely careful, they do have their own little scrapes and falls, and thankfully they don't go running back to mommy and daddy. They usually just rub some dirt on it, as daddy would say, and keep going. This rather pissed off the wives a lot when they heard about this originally, but they learned to realize that it was helping them to grow very strong. As they all helped with the farm work and they all had their outside play, they were all strong, they were all lean, and it was clear that they were all going to be tall, at least by human standards, that is. By their own standards, at least by the Forced, they wouldn't be even close. Yet, everything had to be ready, and they had to use that strength as harvest season was approaching. They spent their time prepping equipment. Though most of it was automated, it still took a lot of maintenance. Many of the times, it was just the guys underneath the equipment saying things like 9cc socket, channel lock pliers, and of course, everyone knows, duct tape. The word from the front was constant, but there wasn't much. The only large piece of information was that the Vunshan were trying to be a mediator, being that they had a very small part of their territory bumped up against this sector. They were potentially reaching settlement, which made everybody happy. Perhaps they could return back to their old jobs, but then again, they were settled in. So if things calmed down, what was going to be the choice? This was something that was contention of both the men and the women. They didn't know whether they wanted to leave and go back to their old positions. They were comfortable here. So there's something about living off the land that just is peaceful. Although they may not have a choice, seeing how both sides were having trouble splitting the resources. This was becoming a bit of contention, even though the Vunshan were wanting a percentage, that 1 or 2% that made it very difficult for them to split things. They could get close, but it was never close enough. Never. It all came down to also both sides demanding reparations, and because of that, they claimed that the other was the aggressor, and they would not go by anything less than an even share of the other side. This was as close as you could get to the politicians on any side saying they screwed up, and they just want to cover their butts. Because of all the military hardware in that area, commerce in the area was slowing, and everybody was beginning to push for settlement, causing many of the shuttles and transports to constantly go around the system. This was difficult considering where it was located. It was a main trade route between the Vunshan and the humans, and also between the Nishani and the Zeknekel, and all spiderweb through that area. Even the Ko, a species that doesn't even like dealing with anyone else, was getting more than a little annoyed that many of their shipments were delayed because of this. Eventually, Larry and Vince were called. They were the two most known in that area, and perhaps they could speed things up. They both sat and talked for over a week, trying desperately to figure out a way to try and calm things down, anything. Eventually, they were told that they were not going to be leading the flotilla that was going to be heading that way. But there was something they needed to do. They loaded up their ships and got ready to go. Everything they loaded from was from Sigma 957, and this is why no one outside that planet knew exactly what was going on. Eventually, they came in and could see the two fleets and a single battle group just sitting there, floating in the ether, seemingly not moving in months. The two fleets, of course, were the Forced and the Shani, and the battle group was a Vunshin, simply trying to keep both sides from starting to shoot at each other again. Everybody wanted this to end as peacefully as possible, even those that had their cannons pointed at each other. But then they suddenly heard a noise coming over the radio. It was translated to simply say, "Parley." They didn't know what this meant at first and had to look it up and realize this was a human word, but then all of a sudden, human fleets began to blink right in front of them. So close, in fact, that many of those watching the radar jumped out of their seats, and a few of them almost lost control of their bodily functions. The one to contact all the fleets was actually a Commander Kim off a completely different ship from anything that Larry or Vince flew. It was a warbird just like theirs, but it seemed to be more designed as a battleship than it was for any type of transportation. This made them a little worried, as they realized that anybody who just swings nothing but a hammer will see every problem as a nail. So this caused the pucker factor on all the ships to go up just a little bit higher. Though Kim himself turned out to be very, very level-headed. He immediately asked what the area of contention was between the two factions, and it didn't take long before they both started screaming out what was going on, and finally he muted them both and turned towards the Vunshin and asked, "Okay, you tell me, why is there not peace in this sector? What are you still fighting over?" The Vunshin simply answered, "It's this moon," clicking a few buttons on his version of a datapad, and it came up. Hell, that moon was in visual range. They could see it. That was the only area of contention. Neither side wanted to give it up, as it was completely packed with valuable ore, and it was right next to a very valuable gas giant. The problem is that the Nishani were going to be given the gas giant, but they did not want a forced group anywhere near them. So they wanted all the moons. And the Forced didn't want Nishani near their area. So they wanted the Nishani to give up the gas giant. This was just going back and forth with absolutely no end in sight. And after about 20 minutes of this, the Commander Kim just opened up the comms and said, "I need to ask you all a question." They all immediately shut up and listened, immediately looking directly at their screens, no one blinking. "If the moon is a problem, and it's the only thing stopping peace from this sector and stopping commerce from going through, and you guys to stop killing each other, I just have a question. What if the moon just wasn't there?" As he said this, every human must have realized what he was talking about, as every single human ship began to turn, traverse itself so that the bow of their ship was facing that moon. The main guns were now locked on. They weren't even trying to hide it. Both sides began to freak the hell out because they knew if that moon was simply exploded, it would take them a long, long time to pick up all the pieces, as they would be launching out at speeds that most of them really didn't want to think about. And if a large chunk came flying into their battle formation, well, that would be problems. After they all took a breath and calmed down, the commander simply stated, "If you two can't stop fighting over it, give it to the Vunshin, and everything is done. Yes, if we give it to them, then everybody's done fighting. Am I correct?" As the Force and Ashani looked into the screens and pretty much their version of nodding yes, the Vunshin just chimed in and said, "But we are unable to mine it. We do not have the technology to do so." Commander Kim responded, "Then we'll give you mining equipment and you can figure it out. Can we get some sort of peace accord now?" It took another 47 hours. 47 hours of the leadership actually meeting on the deck of Kin's ship. And they sat there and hammered out the last of the details. Several of the politicians on either side even showed up because this was going to be historic. They would be able to actually end this without having to destroy an entire species. They would end a war without losing half, two-thirds, three-quarters, or almost all their fleet. And since they didn't surrender, they can return with their honor intact, and both sides understood that very, very well. And as the final papers were signed, metaphorically speaking, it's all done on data pads now, the humans surprised them all. We have something for you. With that, the sides of almost all the ships opened up, those that came from Sigma 957, and shuttles began to pour out to all sides. They were surprised at this. What were they sending? Was this technology? Was this something very good? Oh, it was something very good. Larry responded, "You all have something called a harvest festival, or something akin to it, I'm sure. I've checked all your histories, and this is fairly common." All of them seeming to nod yes. This is a common thing everywhere in the universe. Well, our harvest festival is about to begin, and we thought we would share a meal with everyone. We all know you enjoy human food. We tried to get anything as close to your diet as possible, but I mean, it is human food after all. But I'm sure we can all just settle this over a pint next time. The species were confused as they had no idea what a measurement had anything to do with anything, but they did enjoy the gift. They enjoyed the fact that human shuttles had actually landed in their bays, but the shuttles didn't stay there. Instead, the shuttles simply opened up and the containers were pushed out by AI. And then the AI got back on and simply left, bringing more and more in, leaving those inside the ships to hurry up and move the containers because the next shuttle was coming in. They either moved the containers or those containers were going to get landed on. This actually turned out throughout both fleets to be kind of a running gag as they laughed and smiled, realizing this was going to be the first fresh food they've had in weeks. And the humans had brought it as a simple gift. They didn't owe anybody anything. I mean, who the hell doesn't want a home cooked meal? Once all the shuttles returned, the human group left. One by one, they simply blinked out. This again leaving all the species confused. How did they do that? They just seem to jump in. It's just freaky how they do that. On board the ships, they were all looking forward to getting home to see their families. They didn't want to leave, especially this time of the year. They had to leave everything in the hands of the wives and some of the men that left behind, and definitely the kids, even though most of the kids were old enough to operate most of the machinery without any difficulties at all. As they got home, the families all ran to the landing pads to go and meet them, and it was simply a hallmark moment as they all ran up and hugged each other and realized everything's going to be fine now. The Harvest Festival was about ready to begin as they even came in, as massive amount of foods were out. Even over the smell of the ionizing engines, they could smell all that fresh made chow. And both Larry and Vince looked at each other and then looked forward, having to wipe drool off their face as they realized how much this is going to be awesome. Fresh and hot, and is just unbelievably appetizing just to look at, just to smell. But as everyone got ready to grab their own plates, Larry grabbed that glass of mead and raised it up high and said, "There's an old tradition that used to be common back on Earth. It was during our harvest festival on one of our continents. We called it something else, but we wanted to every year give thanks for what we have. And I believe you all will join me in a toast as a thanks to having family, friends, all of us in good health, and the peace that has finally returned to this galaxy." With that, they all looked up and they realized he wasn't lying. Yes, the accords have been signed. Everything can go back to normal. Everybody began to cheer at this. And I'll finally say it. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. And they all said the same thing as they raised their drinks way up in the air After all this time, he began to drink and savored the sweet alcoholic beverage brewed from the honey of his own bees. He just enjoyed the hell out of it. His wife came close afterwards. Gregnar leaned over and held him close, wrapping her tail around him. He knew exactly what that meant. Well, it meant one of two things. Either he was not getting any sleep tonight, or she was so drunk she was subconsciously trying not to fall over by latching onto him. Then again, Gregnar's always been a lightweight. Larry looked over at the kids. Vince was doing the same. Then he looked up to the sky, back to his wife. Both of them looked at each other and said, "To peace." They knocked their mugs together cheerfully, and Vince said, "Yep, and let's see how long this one lasts."